Asmongold reacts to a video by the content creator LegendaryDrops in which they shed light on problems in the gaming industry where the creators and players of certain games like Avowed refuse to come to terms with the reality that the game just wasn't that good.
The games were not made for me. Oh boy.
How many times have you guys heard the line, this game wasn't made for you? How many times have you seen people running to the defense of a game and saying that, well, if you don't like it, stop talking about it?
Yeah. This is exactly
Stop seeking out negative commentary and criticism on a game if you just want to have your viewpoint reinforced.
I'd like to add to this and point out that the problem isn't just in games, but in shows and movies across the board. What should be a beautiful landscape of hundreds of well fleshed out IPs with stunning visuals and amazing adaptations has instead become an era where most people either hate the products or have simply checked out altogether. The problem isn't just that creators are thinly veiled activists of some kind, but rather that the mechanisms of criticism, which should be naturally correcting these media through a cycle of production, feedback, and adaptation, are being impeded and ignored. But before I get into that, if you like this episode of Balance Takes, hit that subscribe button and help me get to 1,000 followers, or I'll go back in time and make sure Asmongold is completely bald. All one needs is to have the backing of a massive company or a big studio, or to have the politically correct opinions. And for some reason, that makes the product, be it a show, or movie, or game, immune from criticism. Unfortunately, this has a disastrous side effect of media not being willing to, or being completely unable to improve. Believe it or not, there's a reason that what Hollywood and Disney have churned out for decades has just become more and more cookie-cutter garbage. And it's a combination of stakeholders and CEOs not being willing to take risks and not wanting to offend certain activist groups. Meanwhile, the news media is more than willing to run interference for them.
How am I not the target audience for this? Maybe the problem isn't that Avowed wasn't made for me. Maybe the problem is it was made for no one. Because I've seen a lot of people arguing that games don't need interactivity, that realism isn't necessary, and that games like Avowed don't need to have those kind of features just for the sake of having them. All right, that's fine. Explain this. How does removing basic interactivity from a first-person RPG make it better? Please.
It doesn't. Like, there are so many things about this game that were just kind of very mid.
And we see this similarly from other shows as well, like Doctor Who, which hasn't been doing that well in viewership last I checked, or other examples like The Acolyte or Agatha All Along. These shows come from established IPs, and they should be doing well. They should be successful with minimum advertisement, and yet they consistently fail. Why is that? Or for one, the writers are terrible, but besides that, they're writing for an audience that simply doesn't exist. And that's how you end up with games like Dragon Age the Veilguard, where the designs are Disneyfied and boring, and the dialogue seems like it was written by a 5th grader.
Well, wasn't expecting to fight an ogre today.
Or even in The Acolyte, where the lines between good and evil are so messily defined as to not even be worth existing in the first place. The writers are trying to appeal to everyone, while ensuring that they inject the quote-unquote right opinions.
The message.
And as a result, not only does the medium not have an identity, but the little identity it does manage to have appeals to no one, except people who are going to like the movie no matter what it was.
I saw a tweet the other day from Michael Dowse, Larian Studios head of publishing, and it really hit the nail on the head because he was talking about how so many of these big budget games don't actually tell players what they are before launch, nor do they understand who that audience is before they launch. They rely on billboards, hype, and broad marketing campaigns, but they failed to build any real relevance or resonance before they release. It's a completely avoidable disaster, but it keeps happening because these games are assuming that they have an audience before actually trying to earn one. And that's where this industry keeps going wrong, because for years now, publishers have still been relying on outdated methods to try to figure out what players want. Metrics, surveys, focus groups, and curated fan feedback that's painting a imaginary picture of what that audience actually looks like. Now, what makes matters even worse is today's modern internet culture where people don't actually say what they think. They say what they think they're supposed to say.
This can be seen in shows like Obi-Wan. Yes, I'm going to harp on Star Wars because it's something that had great potential that I feel has been utterly wasted by Disney. People have been saying for decades that they wanted more content from their favored Obi-Wan Kenobi. This was very well known across the internet. You didn't need any focus groups to know this. Everyone wanted more Obi-Wan. And it's not surprising. He was one of the most beloved characters in all of Star Wars. But once the writers and directors got a hold of that sentiment and decided they wanted to make money on it, they then had to go in and rip out everything that made Obi-Wan great in the first place. His adventurous spirit? Gone. His pride as a Jedi? Gone. His reliability and dependability? Well, we can't have that because a strong masculine figure on screen is totally from the 60s. This is current year. We have to spend time having the men come to terms with It's emotions. The directors just can't give people the obvious nostalgia bait of Obi-Wan beating up clones and droids on a crazy side quest that only a swashbuckling, semi-cautious and skilled Jedi would do. They have to make it as generic as possible for general audiences, and then pave over it with their specific ideology, turning the character into an unrecognized pile of goo.
Look at the ridiculous priorities that make it into modern games today. Games designed around whether or not you can pet a dog rather than whether or not it actually plays well. This is why Ubisoft thinks...
Bro, millennial game design. You can't break a barrel, but you can pet a dog.
The same thing happens in media as well. Let's take, for instance, Star Trek Discovery. No longer do we have the fundamentals of the original series, the gravitas of Deep Space Nine, the philosophical dilemmas of post-scarcity Earth spreading peace instead of tyranny, or the gripping subtleties of a serious captain and crew. What people want nowadays is brain rot, deconstructed dystopia with all the veneer of science fiction and fake drama. The meaningful interactions of a crew that respect one another and address each other with appropriate titles and yes sir and yes captain and aye, none of that matters anymore. Now we just have the crew yelling and cursing at each other informally and running from one impossible adventure to the next, all because that's what the modern audience wants, right?
Games designed around whether or not you can pet a dog rather than whether or not it actually plays well.
Now don't get me wrong, unlike many, I don't actually hate Star Trek Discovery, but where it fails, it crashes and burns. But let's say you watched the show and you had similar feelings. You didn't feel comfortable with it and you didn't like the direction they were taking. You decide to voice your opinion, maybe in a review or maybe posting online or on social media or on Reddit. And then the moment you decide to voice that opinion and criticize one of these IPs like Star Trek or Doctor Who or Star Wars, they are dismissed with the same old stale accusations of, you must hate X identity group, or you must hate women in movies. Like, we haven't heard all that before.
And that's when we started experiencing a rampage of, I would say, hyper-conservative bigotry and vitriol.
They can't seem to accept that somebody might just not like the game, so they have to invent some entirely different narrative, one where they are noble warriors defending against some political invasion.
This is exactly right. You're fighting against fascism by tweeting about it. It's so exhausting. It's so just unbelievably exhausting.
Tell themselves that any criticism of a game is part of some orchestrated culture war, as if it couldn't possibly be that somebody just has independent thoughts about a game.
And this is the crux of the issue. For years, we've had an environment that just creates a feedback loop where games, movies, and shows cannot evolve because every possible metric of criticism is excused away, ignored, or in some cases, censored.
Cannot be engaged with honestly. When people go out of their way to label or dismiss anybody who disagrees with them, all they are doing is insulating developers from reality. This isn't just bad for discourse, it's actively sabotaging the future of game design. If nobody is allowed to point out what doesn't work, how are things ever supposed to get better? This kind of defensive discourse sends mixed signals to the developers, and it creates an environment where studios have no idea who their audience is.
And that's how you end up with claims like, X must have failed because the people are tired of superhero movies. They must have superhero movie fatigue. No, they're not tired of superhero movies. They don't have superhero fatigue or Marvel fatigue. They have garbage fatigue. If trash is picked up in your apartment complex or your housing area every day instead of once a week, I guarantee you that eventually you just let the trash pile up. Perhaps it'd even sit there for a couple of weeks before you took it out. Because why care? What's the point? It's all trash anyway, and it's going to be taken out every single day, so what's the urgency? Why go to the theater and see Zendaya, Pedro, and The Rock slop number 875? You've seen it all before, and you'll see it again eventually.
This is why so many modern games end up feeling soulless, because they aren't being designed with a strong creative vision. They aren't being designed for a real audience. They're being designed to pass through multiple layers of corporate approval, sensitivity checks, and marketing analysis, stripping away anything that makes them feel personal, passionate, or bold. Instead of creating something great and letting it find its audience, they're trying to chase some imaginary audience that doesn't actually exist.
In the end, the only remedy for making great games, shows, or movies will be to abandon the focus groups and corporate drive to make something custom tailored to be Game of the Year or Best Picture, and to actually just make something with a unified vision, independent of what they think the supposed modern audience wants. Or in the case of games, stop having a publisher come in after the fact and turn everything into boring, safe mush. Instead, they should focus on making a thrilling, quality experience. And yes, I'm looking at you, Homeworld 3. But instead, we have to sit back and watch well-established IPs get run aground like a ship smashed into a coral reef with no one at the helm, only to be eventually abandoned because, well, in the minds of the producers, it didn't work the last time they tried it, so they might as well let it sit there and rot. well-established IPs, and even big companies like Disney, if they are not critiqued, maintained, and the issues with their movies and shows fixed, slowly the well-oiled machine will eventually run down, collapsing under the weight of its own accumulated errors. But anyway, those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Hit that subscribe button and let me know your compliments or criticisms down in the comment section down below, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!